Now, what do you know? I'm in an incredibly good mood.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hey, Steve.
Can't wait to hear these pastoral reports.
Bring your own
Your whole
questions.
history of your life. Right?
Exactly.
She said, there's
On the day I was born.
I'm so glad you're healed.
I know, I feel much better, thank you.
Does she train? De-escalate?
She's like an artist, so she, it comes from like some group in DC.
Welcome.
Yeah, but if you can use them for anything.
Yeah.
And then if you want more, just I can put you in contact with.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. The thing that is funny, because the first one is Peace Be With You. And I was thinking, what hopefully.
Come on in, welcome.
Just like while you're passing the peace.
Yeah, well.
Victor, Michael canceled the after service rehearsal today, so we could all come.
Just for this.
Yeah.
He wanted to swell the crowd.
If you could lead us in a song,
Yeah.
so it was like rehearsal.
Because everybody taught.
How are we doing, Dave?
We're doing great. You know,
Still possible, nothing you. Great. As long as that possibility still exists, we can all pray for you.
The big surgery, I think.
Oh,
We sent them some possible questions, but tabulated a little bit.
oh, come on. It's always the case.
But sometimes that's a healing.
We're gonna give folks 5 more minutes because we start officially at 11:30.
Steve's in the beanbag, yay.
Choir and 30 seats.
That's it. I sound like we get in like actor studio with favorite swear word.
I'll say something.
I used to walk all the time.
The YouTube's up, Facebook's up. The website's being a little bit weird.
Welcome. Scribble down all the notes, right? Like, yeah. Yes, you can grab a chair if you want to, or move a chair if you need to.
There you go, they'll have
Okay, we're fully engaged.
That's right. This interview's over.
Oh my gosh. Just when I thought they couldn't get any better. Oh boy. Hi, Sandy.
Add a few chairs too.
Oh, yeah.
Estimated 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Oh, thank you.
There you go.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. I hope you brought your juicy questions for Victor.
Oh, your turn is next.
Oh, well, 2 weeks from now.
They're gonna do unto you.
I'm nowhere near as interesting. Well, thank you all for being here. This was an idea that one of our adult education team members had. They said, we hear little bits and pieces about the pastors' lives from their sermons, but it'd be great to just kind of get the full download. We're going to be done at 12:30, don't worry, but just to hear a little bit more. And so we're so glad that you're here. The official name of the committee is Adult Education and Spiritual Formation. And so as we hear a little bit about Victor's own life and his own spiritual formation, I invite you to kind of listen for how God has been at work in his life and how God might be working in your life as you connect with his story. And so thank you for being here. Thank you to Sally, who's our elder for Adult Ed, who is going to be interviewing Victor. And thank you to Victor for agreeing to do this. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for your Q&As, but this is also getting live streamed onto YouTube and Facebook, and so we're giving Victor full reign to say, I plead the fifth, and not answer a question he might not be comfortable answering. There are some seats in the front row, so thank you all. Let's say a prayer. God, we give you thanks for this community of faith that has called Victor to be with us and to be our minister for spiritual care. We give you thanks for your spirit that is with us in this place and to all who are joining us online. Open our hearts to how you are working, not just through Victor, but in our own lives. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to start by reading a poem, and I think it is related to this morning's sermon. The name of the poem is The Way It Is by William Stafford. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die. And you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. Do you know
Does
that?
anybody else feel like Sally picked that out for you? That's
Do you know that poem?
No.
Okay, it's one of my favorites. So again, I do have a series of questions, but we can kind of see how things go. Where were you born, and where did you grow up?
I was born in Rome, Georgia. in the Floyd County Hospital.
Whoa.
You would think we'd have money. I was born a month early. My mother, Barbara, had a rare condition where they told her she could not have children. And when she became pregnant, they said, if you gain an ounce, your baby will not make it. My mother had to lose weight while she was pregnant with me. And so I was a cesarean baby a month early. My father was driving the brick truck. At that time, my father worked at the Plainville Brickyard. And his famous story is he was getting out of the truck. They called him in. Barbara is now in surgery, and you have a son. And so he's getting out of the brick truck. He said he almost knocked himself out. He hit his head. So everybody was like needing medical attention. I was a problem child from the beginning.
How would you describe your spiritual or religious upbringing?
Okay, so in northwest Georgia, in the town where I'm from, it's 300 people. That's, it would take 2 Plainvilles to make 1 Calvary. Plainvilles and then some more people to make 1 Calvary. Lou has been there, and the town where I was, you have to turn off the main road, and then our town is like just a giant loop. Lou says I was raised in the world's biggest cul-de-sac. It's about a 5-mile, 6-mile loop near a river, the Oostanala River. And in that town of 300, there were at least 6 churches, and everybody went to church. It wasn't, what family are you from, but where do you go to church? That's just what you do. And so there were about 3 Baptist churches because they couldn't get along and they split all the time. And one of them was even called Unity Baptist. Fellowship, Unity, and I forgot the other one. Yeah, they hated each other. And then the Methodist church, where we went, there was no Presbyterian church for miles. And there were like holiness churches where more charismatic churches, and there was an evangelical church also. So we went to the Methodist church, which from my childhood felt, when I came to the Presbyterian church, I felt like I had come home. It felt like what the Methodist church was then. By the time I was an adult, the Methodist church was not recognizable to me as what I grew up with. But that's another story. But I guess my thread was handed to me by my parents, and it's the greatest gift I ever got. They made sure I went to every Sunday to church school. We had vacation Bible school, so we would do it at the Methodist church, and then my mother loved it that I could do it at all the other churches too. So if you did it, they never scheduled them at the same time, so the kids had something to do all summer. So so I got my faith from my parents and from my church family. I learned how to read sitting on my grandmother Midge's lap. In Sunday school, I learned how to read the hymnal. I'll never forget the day she showed me, you don't sing all the words here at once. And I would be lost. I didn't know what was going on. So she would show you, you go to the next line. And I think just, it was just, I don't know how to put words to that, but it is the gift that has kept me alive, basically. To be able to, I've never doubted my faith deep down inside. I've had troubles, of course, with it, but never just that God is real in my experience.
Yeah, I'm sort of building on that. So you have your hymnal, and when did you discover you had a gift for music?
Is anybody here old enough to remember Magnus organs? These little chord organs. There was like an octave and a half here, you plug them in, and they're like buttons that make chords. It would say B flat, C minor. So you play the chord, and then you do the melody over here. So
it's like an electrified auto harp.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So my parents got me one when I was really young. I was the only child because of my mother and the whole thing. But and I just would not let go of it. And so I took piano lessons from Mary Penn, who taught my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and my mother piano lessons. And her goal was to be able to play well enough to play in church. So by the time I was 10, Oline Hightower at the Unity Baptist Church wanted to stay home on Sunday nights to cook dinner for her husband. And so Oline could no longer play the piano on Sunday nights. And so I played. And my parents were just like totally freaked out, like you're 10 years old. And so, so I learned 3 hymns and would go play them. And my friend Rodolfo played the clarinet, and he would practice all night. Yeah.
Did you get paid, or was it a volunteer thing?
I don't remember.
It was a volunteer.
In addition to your parents, who were some of your other big influences when you were growing
up? My aunt, I have really strong aunts. Some that were influences in positive ways. And others who, yeah. So my Aunt Gretna was my father's sister. She was the president of the John Birch Society. She was Patriot of the Year many years. And she would, in our Methodist church, she would stop the pastor from preaching to correct him. And this happened more than once.
Wait, that's an option?
It is not an option. So it was a Methodist church, so it was just whoever the bishop sent was then Gretna's plaything, for the next 3 years or whatever. So my mother confronted her about it, my father confronted her about it, and finally she got upset enough that she broke off and started her own church. So that there were 7 churches. It's still there. It's a beautiful little brick church, and they still have services. And So Gretna had a big influence, and I sometimes think that my call to ministry is kind of penance for us not doing enough about Gretna. So, but she was great and just so smart and so strong-willed and so unique. And then I had another aunt who's more like a great aunt, and she kept me while my mom worked at the local fabric mill, which was about 30 minutes away. And my mom braided fabric before it went out, so she would pull out all of the bad fabric. So while she was there, my Aunt Ella Ruth kept me with my Uncle Elmer. And Elmer is the best. But, and they had a huge influence on me. They didn't have children. They were in their late 50s when they kept me, and taught me all about our family. Elmer taught me how to help him garden. He had this huge vegetable garden because that's how he got away from Ella Ruth. And Ella Ruth had a sewing room where she taught me how to make pocket flaps. That was my specialty. See, she did that to stay away from Elmer. And Elmer kept trying to teach me how to drink beer when I was a teenager. But Elmer taught me that, so this is, I guess, evidence for the internet, but Elmer taught me that we have a couple of famous people in our family tree. One signed the Declaration of, or the Constitution, I think, way back. But the one he's most proud of was Pretty Boy Floyd, the gangster, who was actually like a 10th cousin or something. And Elmer was so proud of him because he was famous. He had music written about him. There was a TV movie about him. There, and he said, you know, he picked a profession and he stuck with it.
So you're playing the piano at the Baptist church on Sunday.
Yeah.
When did you start singing?
In high school. So the county where I grew up, all of the rural, well, it's all rural, but all of the smaller towns fed into one high school in the county seat. So I went to high school in Calhoun, which was about 1,200 kids. So that was a big shock. And in high school, I met some Methodists from the big city of Calhoun who invited me to come be in their youth choir. And I really liked them, and that way I had more people my age. And so my parents would take me, and my mom would wait in the car. And we had a great youth choir. We actually went on a tour to New Orleans once. We did Florida and Disney World once. And I got a solo because I could read music, and I had never sung. And they kept saying, will you sing your solo in rehearsal? No, I will not sing my solo. So I was horrified. And then I think the dress rehearsal was the first time I sang. And my mother cried. It was, you know, one of those horrible theology youth musicals. Dun, 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 Jesus! Terrible! Jesus!
We have some room in here if people in the hallway want to come in. No? So we're going to fast forward a little bit. What brought you to San Francisco?
So after I started singing, so I'm going to fill in a little bit too. So in college, I was a piano major. I have a degree in piano performance and literature. So and while I was there, I studied voice. This beautiful little music department, which has now been decimated by the Southern Baptist Church. But they, my teacher saw some promise in me when I was in high school, and she gave me basically free lessons. My mother wanted to pay, but she said, just pay what you can. So I think I had some lessons that were $5, some that were 20, but she would keep me after her students in the afternoons, and my mom would sleep in the car in the sun, and she wouldn't come in. And so I got, music was kind of like my thing. And in college, I wanted to sing because there were so many good singers in the college. We had people that would go on to the Met. We had one 19-year-old that sang at the Met in our college. And so I had lessons with that teacher, and he said, why don't you try organ? So I attended to organ lessons, and the organ teacher said, why don't you go back to voice? My piano teacher was very happy because that meant I would practice the piano. But in graduate school at Indiana University in Bloomington,
Go there.
I did.
So did our daughter.
Oh, yay!
Piano performance.
Oh, wow! Yeah. Indiana. Yes, Hoosiers. Yes. So in school there, I auditioned for the opera program just because I had learned enough to sing something, and I got a part. And it was my first time to try, and tenors are always, at a premium, so I got a part in an opera called Dialogues of the Carmelites. And it's, I think they're doing it in San Francisco this year. I can't wait. But it's blank, beautiful opera, and just elegant and then gory at the end. There's the ending where the nuns all get their heads chopped off, and it's a true story. And it's the French Revolution, and I remember having we had a basketball with a microphone and a trash can for every head. Somebody would throw the basketball. It was horrible. They had like a paper cutter. So at Indiana, I sang a lot. And after that, I came back to Georgia to be with my dad, who was dying of cancer. And while I was there, I got a really good voice teacher who kind of took me apart and put me back together slowly. And I auditioned at Morningside Presbyterian Church, yes, in Morningside in Atlanta, for the Maryland program of the San Francisco Opera. It was 1992. And all of my friends from IU had just graduated, and they had all come to Atlanta to audition too, and we were all like, well, I did terrible. How are you? I was terrible. Just awful. So we all went out and had margaritas after. While we were sitting there, when we got home, I got a call back to come the next day. I'm like, well, I wouldn't have had those margaritas. and I sang for them, and they asked me to come to San Francisco. And due to their poor judgment, I came to San Francisco and sang in the Maryland program for the summer. Sang at Stern Grove for, I think we had 14,000 people, they said. There. So I don't know if that's even possible, but so our first show at Stern Grove, the conductor, who was from LA, really great guy, Randy Baer, he said, I need to see the Atlanta kids. So me and the soprano came out, and he said, before you go on stage, you need to understand this is San Francisco. And there's some naked people in the front row. So that was my introduction to San Francisco. And there they were.
Just like that.
And just like, here I am. So after Maryland's 3 months, so you really get a good taste of the city. Strangely enough, the place where this opera put me and my partner up was on Jackson Street at, it was on Divisadero at Jackson. It was one of the conductors who had gone to Santa Fe for the summer. So we were at his house for the summer and came here to hear Chanticleer. So first time at Calvary was in 1992. Cried my eyes out. Never heard anything like that before. Chanticleer, just blindingly beautiful. And so what's the question?
That's what Brian said.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, went home and was in Atlanta for 10 years. After that, almost 10 years, and that's when I became a Presbyterian in that period. And and just had to get back.
So how did you end up in seminary?
Okay.
Now we got him.
This is a great story.
From the time I was a kid, I knew I was supposed to do more in church. I knew it. I just knew it. And even there were some tests in like elementary school, and where you take the test, it said you would be a good air traffic controller or priest. And I would think, okay, so those two are the same. So and I always just avoided that, and I just no way will I do that. Because maybe it was because of Gretna, and I just always thought there's too much conflict in church. I don't want to do that. It will backfire. And plus, I was gay, so there was that. When I came to California, I wound up at First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto, great congregation, and I was hired there at the same time they hired their pastor, so they wanted to like replace the worship staff like kind of all at once if they could. So I did like a conference call with the committee for the music, the pastor search committee, and Rob Martin, who was coming from Warren Wilson College in North Carolina to Palo Alto, and me, and we just talked. We really hit it off, and we knew a lot of the same people, and it was going to be fun. And I came to work on my first day at Palo Alto, and this was back in the time when the Presbyterian Church, I think the fighting over LGBT ordination was at its most. And Rob, who was straight and had family and everything, had answered a question on the floor of Presbytery in San Jose in a way that it was overheard that another church said, we don't have to get him on the gay thing, we can get him on this. So they filed charges against him. I think the question was, do you believe in the literal bodily ascension of Jesus to heaven? His answer was like, well, traveling at the speed of light, he would still be in this galaxy. No, I do not believe in that. Here's what I believe. And his answer was beautiful. He said, no, the body of Christ continues to be crucified and continues to be resurrected and continues to ascend all the time. I mean, that I thought was gorgeous. But, so they filed charges against Rob, and on my first day of work at Palo Alto, they said, we have to tell you something. Rob is now being tried for heresy, and he cannot have any contact with any of us or anybody in the church until it's resolved.
Not just your church, but his old
church too. So he had already moved into a house in
this century.
That was this century, barely this century. Yeah, it was 2003. Yeah, and so we would see him. He had I remember a brown Honda Element, and I would see him, and we would wave, and then he would go by. That's all we could. He really wanted it to be by the book because he was horrified by the whole thing, and it went on for 8 months. There were times when the Permanent Judicial Committee would just kind of disappear, and we couldn't get them to return any calls to the church. During that time, the interim pastor who was there said, I'm done, and she went home. The associate got a new call in Princeton, where he still is, and so there were a few Sundays where said, there's no one to preach. I said, pardon me? I've seen preaching done. I will do something for 13 and a half minutes, and I will sit down. So I did these things with the choir, where we did, I remember one Sunday we did kind of a Flannery O'Connor short story with a lot of theology in it, and like it was all music all the way through it with the choir everywhere. It was gorgeous. And another time I think I did actually try to preach during Advent. In the congregation were Robert McAfee Brown, who he had just died. His widow, Sidney Brown, was there. He's a theologian, liberation theologian at Stanford. And Henderson, Mitzi Henderson, and her husband.
Mr.
I want to say Tom, but Tom Henderson. It is Tom Henderson, who was president of Pacific School of Religion for a time. So they were both in the congregation, and they both came up and said, we're writing your letters and you're going to seminary. So I wound up at Pacific School of Religion. And I was still kicking and screaming the whole time. I think this might be a common theme in a lot of ministers' stories, but I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to go to seminary. I didn't want to be a minister. I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't think I was holy enough. I didn't think I was patient enough. I still don't think I'm patient enough. And when I went to the Inquirer's Weekend, where you go and just feel out the seminary, and you can ask questions of the students who are there already. Pacific School of Religion has a reputation as being an angry place. So my first Inquirer's Weekend, it was, hello, my name is Tammy, and I'm a non-theist. I'll be your guide. And like, what in the world? Yeah. And so I went, well, that bought me another year. I don't have to go this year. So I went back and did church again for another year. But then the next year I went. But it was a lot of being almost ready to go and then just finally jumping in. Within the first semester of seminary, I would come home every day with new reasons to quit. And we had practiced my speech to tell the people in the office why I was quitting, and went back every time. But during that time, there was a my friend Beth, who passed a couple of summers ago, she said, I've heard about this thing in Oakland, and they teach it at your seminary called Interplay. And it's Allison doesn't yet, it's a spiritual practice that involves stillness and music and storytelling and dance. I'm like, well, I don't do dance, but I signed up for Interplay class. And so the second semester, I had been in Interplay class for a few weeks, and Lou said, something's happened. What is it? You were enjoying things. You're like, say you're learning stuff. You're actually talking about who you like now rather than why you need to quit. And I think it was really Interplay that it's an embodied spiritual practice where it's all improv. And that, to me, then that's what ministry is. You know, that's what ministry is. Jazz. You know, it is picking up themes and then playing along with them to see what happens. So yeah, Interplay saved me from dropping out of seminary. Yeah, and seminary just got better and better after that. The one thing so everybody can do Interplay. So this is here's the main thing. Cynthia Winton Henry, who was my teacher in Interplay, she said, if you look in the mirror, you'll notice there is an 11 that's growing between your eyebrows. She said, that's your focuser. She said, in Interplay, we take that focuser and you must not focus so hard, so intently on everything and obsess on everything. So there would be students in class and they will be explaining the atonement or something, and the students are all like, this is too much. But it was a great thing to practice soft focus, is what she called it, and that has gotten me through many Gretna-like moments in church.
I think we skipped an important milestone, and that is, where and when did you meet Lou?
It was around 2003, right?
Yeah.
3 or 4.
Yeah, probably 2 was the first time we met.
And
At Mission Dolores.
yeah, so I knew I needed to sing on my own, because this was the first time I wasn't like, in Atlanta, they would just call me up and say, would you like to sing this role in this opera? Because I knew everybody. In San Francisco, nobody knew or cared, that I wanted to sing. So I listened to choirs. I found CDs of choirs around the Bay Area until I found one that spoke to me. And I found Coro Hispano de San Francisco y Conjunto de Nuevo Mundo, which is the Hispanic San Francisco choir and the Ensemble for the New World and the New World Ensemble. So it was all Spanish language music that Juan Pedro Gaffney had gone to Mexico City to actually discover. And he had gone to the cathedral, gone into the basement, had gotten manuscripts, and then written his own arrangements of this music that had never been performed outside of Mexico City. And we did concerts every January for Dia de los Tres Reyes, for the Epiphany. And those concerts we would do around this time. Well, sometimes they would bleed into February, but we would do them in late January. We would rehearse starting the day after Christmas and just rehearse until the concerts. And so everything was done in Spanish, and then he would translate for the gringos for a while. But this was during the time when a lot of people were being deported. So most of the tenor section had been deported. So that's how I got a job with Coro Hispano. And in the program, at least once they listed me as Victor Flores, just kosher. And yeah, it was great. But and that was such a unique, powerful group of people, and I still see a lot of them. So at Mission Dolores, where we rehearsed and where we performed our biggest concert, there was always a fiesta following in the social hall, and I was like, "Who's the cute blind guy?" Yeah, and so Lou lived like a half block from there, so that's how we got to know each other.
I happened to be walking down the street and heard this beautiful music, and I went in to check it out, and I went to the party afterwards, and that's how we met.
And I've been his guide dog ever since. Our first time we went out, I walked him into 2 telephone poles. And the last, a phone booth. There are no phone booths. And I walked him into it, yeah, and just bam! We found one. Exactly.
And so you talked about first church as in Palo Alto. What are some of the other congregations that you've served?
Where I was in high school, that's when I started working in the church, was my first year in college, because I was close by, and I directed the choir there for all of college. I was the music director at the First Methodist Church of Calhoun. It was about 500 people. If you remember the Jimmy Carter administration, anybody? His budget director was from that church. He was about 7 feet tall and always sat in the back. And so after that, some Methodist churches in Indiana, Disciples of Christ Church, beautiful Disciples of Christ Church in Columbus, Indiana, that was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, just gorgeous. The Lutheran Church in Atlanta, Church of Our Redeemer. And then the church, well, my first, more substantial job offer, as a musician, was at Providence Presbyterian Church in Chamblee, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta. And they said, we know our church is dying, but we want you just to be with us until we close. And that's when I met lifetime BFF Marty Reitmeyer, who is a kind of a famous educator in the Presbyterian Church. And she was the director of Christian education. So we closed them down. But they fought until the last day. It was the right thing. And now there's affordable housing where that church used to be. So it's it worked. And after that, I did a lot of interviews. We were talking about this last night. It was 1989. And so you go to an interview and they say, so tell us about your wife and children. Or, so why aren't you married? And I finally just, I was just fed up, and I said, because Jesus wasn't married. When you feel like it's over anyway, it's like, well, yeah. So I found a church in Decatur, North Decatur Presbyterian Church, where Marcy was seminary intern afterwards. But yeah. So I went in and sat down with Agnes Norfleet, I remember who was there, Debbie Miller, and she had a little necklace that was a flute, and she played the flute for us. And it was just like, these people are kind of nice. They had the first female pastor I had ever met anywhere. Didn't know you could do that. And we had a good conversation, and we talked. I thought I'd be there about an hour. We talked for over 2 hours, and they introduced me to the practice. I knew the concept of inclusive language, but that was they were the inclusive language church, and they said, how would you approach this? And we went through a lot of things, and they liked my answers, I guess. But I went home, and I told my partner, I said, even if they don't hire me, we're going to church there. Because they sound like they help people, and I've never been in a church that actually helps people. Seriously. But the Methodist church where I had been singing in Buckhead in Atlanta, they were all about just the worship service, and it was beautiful. But the one of the pastors had the other one followed by a private investigator so that he could become the head of staff, and it was just like, get me out of here. So this Presbyterian church of about 250 at that time, it changed me just profoundly, and I felt like I can commit my life to this kind of ministry. I can commit this. This is worth my time. This is worth my trouble. This is worth using all my education in. And so, at the first rehearsal, they said, so I said, how many people are in the choir? And they said, well, there are only 8 people in the choir right now, and 2 of them are the former choir director's wives. And then they went on talking, and I said, can we go back? Anyway, one of the wives left, but another one stayed, and I think there was a divorce in there somewhere, but they were okay, but they were really smart. And so I realized that the church was a combination of Emory University people, of Columbia Seminary people, of Agnes Scott College people, really smart people, and a lot of scientists from the CDC were there also. And so I said, well, this is Handel's Messiah. We'll be doing it for Christmas, and it's going to be terrible unless we get more people. And so we wound up with 40 people in the choir by Christmas, and we did it. And it was, there were some of you that really struggled just to keep up, but we learned to mark our scores and to, how to watch occasionally, and and it was beautiful. And they, they were ripe on the vine, and I was also their organist, so I had to learn how to fake playing the organ. And it's really easy.
John Walcott.
I know John Walcott. There will be no fugues when I and, so some Sundays I sounded like, baseball mitts and skis. But it was okay. Yeah. I loved that, learning to do that too. By the end of that, I was there 8 years, I think. And they're still my family. And when I go to Atlanta, that's who I stay with, are the people at that church.
So what brought you to this congregation?
So I had, out of seminary, the only thing I wanted to do is be the pastor of the Metropolitan Community Church in the Castro. Because when I was in my dark hours in the early 2000s, after I'd gotten here, I went to MCC on Sunday nights, and it was this strange mix of evangelical and Catholic, and it was this ecumenical kind of rock and roll service that always served communion, and it blew my mind, and the preaching was off the charts, and they sang communion, and the music was beautiful, and I befriended the pastor there, Penny Nixon, and I just wanted to work there so much. So by the time I got there, they had a lot of splits, as churches can, and they were down to about, 200. They were at 600 at the height of the AIDS epidemic. That's what that church was founded for. That's the sermon today. Looking back, why was this church even invented? Well, as a refuge for LGBT people, and who knew it? But AIDS was on the way. So there is no doubt in my faith journey that God made MCC to be ready for what was going to happen in the 1980s and 90s. An amazing church. When we served communion, we would always serve communion and then touch somebody and pray with them individually, because the people with AIDS who came to worship, they wouldn't be touched all week. So that was the custom that became kind of this Pentecostal, I will lay hands on thee and have a prayer, and it was beautiful. People would come to communion with medicine poles, and then they would be gone the next week. So I was there for 3 years, and I went there before I was ordained and helped them organize all of their volunteers. And then they made me associate pastor, and that's when I was ordained. And we did the ordination at First Pres Palo Alto so we could have more room. And then after that, I told Lou, I won't move you to. Well, the first day of preaching class, they say a preacher has to be ready to do 3 things: preach, move, and die. That's what the guy said. Okay, preach and move, but I preach and die, but I can't ask Lou to move. Lou knows public transportation better than anybody in this room. He is a tourist attraction when he's on Muni and he hears people making incorrect plans. We were on the J one day and he goes, "Steps coming down," and they just looked at him and then they're So I'm like, I can't make Lou move. And so I will not make you move to Alabama so that I can, be a preacher. So we're going to stay in the Bay Area if God is willing. So after MCC, I searched everything. I applied to be chaplain at Laguna Honda, and I was actually a finalist there. I applied at Montclair Presbyterian Church in Oakland, and I was one of the 2 finalists there. And I applied here at Calvary, and I found Calvary. I was telling this. Found Calvary on Craigslist, and I remember I read the description about being with the seniors, doing pastoral care. It's kind of like a chaplain-y thing. And then all the description of the church, I'm like, oh, that's the church where Chanticleer was. I know that church. And I had known Susan Ashton, who had been here with the Covenant Network, and Pam Beyer, and all of that. And so, it was on Craigslist. And I came and interviewed with Lois, and Marion, and Priscilla, and John Weems. And it was another one of those things. I told Lou, I said, it's a big, pretty church, and usually me and big, pretty churches don't mix. But I said, we'd give it 6 weeks. We don't have to move. It'll be fine. That's what I thought. Yeah, it won't work. It just won't work. And 8 years later, we have never been happier. The best part of it is that the trip to Tijuana then produced the son we never knew we wanted, who is Pedro Luis Perez Cush, who is our asylum seeker who lives with us. And we just celebrated our 2nd year, the beginning of our 3rd year with Peter. He is in the process. Thanks to Dave, he found a job at Andronico's on 32nd Avenue, and he's a sous chef, and he's doing great. And, so it's like, I didn't know I had paternal instincts. And Lou too. And so we'll be like, we're going to bed, and Lou's like, Peter's not home yet. He'll wake me up. It's 2 a.m, and Peter's not home yet. And I'm like, he walked from Guatemala. He'll be okay. Peter's brilliant. He's just the best.
Yeah, and another theme is that pretty soon after you came, Alden got sick.
Yeah.
I believe you stepped in for.
Well, so our 2nd week at Calvary was the choir did Poulenc's Gloria with the Academy Orchestra, and Alden conducted, and the next, I think 2 days after or so, choir, you can correct me if I've got this timeline wrong, but he went to the emergency room, and he never quite returned. He came back a few Sundays after that, but so that Christmas Eve, they asked me to direct the choir.
Wow.
And I got to know Alden by visiting him at home about once a week or so, and he was a hoot. He was just the best. And I got to then. It really helps to have been here in that period to know then who he was so close to, because he had been here forever. Over 60 years.
Wow.
Lots of turnover.
But it seems like you step in at the right time.
I hope.
Choir
I
might
think I
have different
made a few
thoughts.
snide remarks to the choir on Christmas Eve, because Christmas Eve makes me nervous. So many people in the choir's coming in late, and I'm like, you're supposed to be on time! Who is this person? It's just started here. And then in the years that followed, prayed for. I didn't know I was praying for Michael, but I was.
This is my last question, so get ready, audience. What is bringing you joy these days?
Joy is, somebody said, what's the Holy Spirit? I think that joy is worse than the Holy Spirit to try to capture. I mean, in the last few years is, this weekend, it was nice weather, I mean, idyllic days, and we took the dog to Golden Gate Park. We found a parking spot on 10th Avenue. It was great, and we took the dog into the park, took her off the leash for a minute. She ran in circles just as hard as she could. She doesn't know she's 12. And then she's tired, and we were just walking through the park and just sitting there, and that was just, felt like a small return to normal. And then yesterday, where did we take her? Somewhere. He can't remember either. It's bad. It's bad at our house. Yeah.
Even my place. Was it the Legion of
We
Honor?
did, but we took the dog somewhere.
Legion of Honor.
We went to the Legion of Honor. That's it. I'd never seen the Holocaust Memorial there, and saw that, and yeah. We asked when John Walker would be playing next.
Well, it seems like Cassie is a consistent source of
Cassie
joy.
is a good common denominator for joy. Yes. But Peter gives us a lot of joy too. Just that he's safe, and that he knows he's safe is just overwhelming, and that we love each other. He's the best.
Coda.
Yeah, and we're obsessed with a movie called Coda on Apple TV Plus. So everybody watch Coda. It's the best movie ever. Anyway.
I can't tell you how many times we've seen it.
Yeah, the blind guy loves it. It's about deaf people. So yeah.
We watch it with captions turned on for Peter, and with audio description for me.
And it's about deaf people.
And it's about that.
We are the house of accessibility.
Well, thank you, Victor.
Yeah. What do you want to know about me?
Jasmine.
Victor, we met at MCC.
Yes.
At that time, before you became associate, you were also a interim senior pastor before coming
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
After you left and a few other people left, I decided to follow you here because I tried other churches, but I found Calvary was the best among several.
Jasmine, just to watch you grow into who you are over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
It's just been such a blessing. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. Other questions? Jefferson.
This is a softball, don't worry. It's an unanswerable hypothetical. But your strong Aunt Gretna, if she had grown up in an era when women could be ordained,
Oh,
do you
sure.
think she would have been?
Oh, sure. She didn't need ordination. She's going to do it anyway. Yeah.
Because when she started her own church, she had to find another plaything that was a guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was her son.
Jean?
I love your sermons, and I'm curious to know how you go about planning one night, decide what to say, and how, excuse me, how long does it take to plan one and you edit, like those of us who write, edit, and edit?
The first day of preaching class, well, the first time student preachers preached in preaching class was horrifying. I studied preaching, I did it twice with J. Alfred Smith from the church in Oakland. Alan Temple. Yes, thank you. Alan Temple. And he was just the most amazing preacher in the world. I mean, just amazing. He could just, I remember he preached once, he did Humpty Dumpty, and we were all like, ah! Yeah. But the first person who preached in preaching class started, and he let her get about 3 minutes in, and he said, I need you to sit down. And he went up and he drew these little trees. He said, here's the text over here. Here you are. And these trees. So I start with the text, and he says you have to get the text in your head, and you have to take it to dinner, and you have to buy fine wine and flowers. You have to almost have it memorized, if not memorized. You just kind of like dwell on it until you feel like you know what it's saying at this time. But then you go back and do the same text in 2 years, 2 or 3 years, and why in the world did I come up with that interpretation back then? But so usually I'll do some form of that, and then I'll read some commentaries, and then I'll decide to ignore them. And then, and you'll look at the words that pop out and look them up in Greek or Hebrew, and that's where I start. Where I wind up is sometimes unrecognizable. I always think of him saying, you need to sit down.
Like whitewater rafting.
Yes, yeah. So, and usually if there's always some kind of music that is beating me over the head by the end of it.
Before the pandemic, you had a secret place a secret cafe in Japantown where you would like hide away, and sometimes people ran into you there.
There are no secret places.
And
Did you do your undergraduate work at Indiana too, or did you go to Christian college in Georgia?
In high school, I started studying piano with Helen Ramser, who was at Shorter College in Rome, Georgia. And she was amazing. I heard her play. I heard all these classical pianists play, but when I heard her play, it was like I understood it, So I told my mom I wanted to take lessons with her, so that's who I was with. And so I wound up, my parents said, we've enjoyed supporting you through high school. Now that it's time for college, good luck. So I put so much into my college audition, and I auditioned there, and I got a full ride. I got a full scholarship, and it was back when you actually could get student grants. They actually had to write me a check a couple of times, and I made them do it. But yeah, it was owned by, I think it's 20% owned by the Southern Baptist Convention. Since then, they fired all the music staff, and they've been terrible. I don't want to end on that.
So Indiana was a
graduate school. Yeah, I went in piano and then changed to conducting, choral conducting, so I can sing more.
we have time for maybe.
So I'm very critical of and I love Michael Campbell.
Well, I'm sat there with Lois service.
Well, yeah.
Spicy. We have time for one more question.
Victor, have you ever been a private teacher of voice or piano?
I taught for 8 years at Emory University. I taught voice and directed opera workshop there. And that was great. My best student was actually a student from outside the school. He was a tenor, and he was the son of the Archbishop of Puerto Rico or so, and he was the head of CNN in Espanol, and he had this verissimo tenor voice, and so we did La Boheme with him, and he was just cranking it out. It was beautiful. My other students, I had students who worked at the CDC, and they would tell me these horror stories, or the Yerkes Primate Center, where they did experiments on monkeys. Horrible place. And a tornado came through Atlanta, and hit the Yerkes Primate Center. And I had a student that came in and said, there are monkeys running through the streets of Decatur, Georgia with hepatitis. If you see one, cover your eyes. Because they will spit at you and you'll get hepatitis. But you go wash your hands. And I have to call somebody. Yeah. I had very smart students, brilliant students, but they just weren't there for music.
Well, I'm going to give you the last word. Is there anything that you would like to, that has not been covered, that you would like to share with this lovely crowd?
Well, when I asked Susan Ashton, I said, because she knew you, she knew Calvary, I said, should Lou and I go to Calvary? Is it going to be a good fit? And she just held the phone. And she said, well, they'll love Lou. And then she said, you could buy an iron. I put these in the dryer this morning.
We don't have an iron.
We do. You don't even know it. We do. After we've been here a while, somebody meaning to say, because you're a gay couple, they said, do you feel welcome here? It was at coffee hour. Do you really feel welcome here? And we talked about it, and we feel more welcome here than we did at MCC. I mean, Calvary is it's a healthy system, and it absorbs, so much, and it's resilient, and feels like family. And just watching you this morning come in, Patty Rayleigh was here. Did you see? The first time in 3 years since her wreck. I mean, just seeing people come in and you know them, and it's like, oh, she's back, and there's Fanny, and it was just, it's home. It's home. Yeah.
Thank you, Victor.
If I could be any tree, it would be.
Next week is Marcy. Come back.
Thank you.
Yes, boy, I still love you, baby. I'm kind of good.